A military catastrophe of historic proportions has just been confirmed inside Russia, and the Kremlin is in absolute panic tonight. Vladimir Putin was personally told by his top general that the strategic Ukrainian city of Kupiansk had been captured. Russian state media celebrated. The defense ministry made it official. Russian military bloggers cheered. And then Ukraine quietly, methodically, and with surgical precision proved every single word of that announcement to be a lie. Tonight, we reveal how a 27-year-old Ukrainian intelligence officer hiding inside the city orchestrated one of the most devastating military reversals of the entire war. How Ukraine encircled and destroyed elements of Russia's elite First Guards tank army. How 1,027 Russian soldiers died in a kill ratio of 27-1. And how Putin's entire 100,000-man army across the front is now collapsing under sustained Ukrainian pressure. Stay with us, because what you are about to hear will absolutely stun you. On November 20th, 2025, Russia's Chief of General Staff Valery Gerasimov walked into Vladimir Putin's office with what he believed was triumphant news. Kupiansk, the strategic rail and road hub in northeastern Ukraine, had been liberated by Russian forces. Putin was briefed. The Russian Defense Ministry published an official statement. State media broadcast the announcement across the entire Russian information architecture. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov confirmed it publicly. There was just one problem. None of it was true. Behind the scenes, a 27-year-old Ukrainian intelligence officer who had been operating inside the city throughout the Russian infiltration had already been feeding precise targeting data back to Ukrainian commanders for months. That data would become the foundation of an operation that would dismantle Russia's grip on Kupiansk piece by piece, district by district, building by building. By December 2025, just weeks after Gerasimov delivered his triumphant report to Putin, the head of Ukraine's Kartia Corps of the National Guard, Igor Oblonsky, was standing inside the city itself. He looked directly into a camera and said words that contradicted 4 weeks of Russian state media propaganda. The Russians inside the city were completely cut off. For a long time, they could not understand what was happening. But now they knew. They were surrounded. They were finished. And the units Russia had used to make its breakthrough, elements of the prestigious First Guards tank army, one of Russia's most elite military formations, had been encircled, isolated, and reduced to surviving on emergency air supply drops that could not sustain operations. To understand the magnitude of this Russian disaster, you have to understand why Kupiansk is so strategically important. The city has approximately 27,000 pre-war residents, but its significance has nothing to do with population. It sits at the intersection of critical rail and road arteries connecting Kharkiv, Ukraine's second-largest city, to the south via Izyum and towards Slovyansk and Kramatorsk in the Donetsk region. Whoever controls Kupiansk controls the entire transit corridor that affects supply and reinforcement flows across a massive section of the northeastern front. Russia understood this from day one of the invasion. In February 2022, Russian forces seized Kupiansk immediately and held it as a key logistics node for operations across Kharkiv Oblast. Ukraine liberated it in September 2022 during the stunning Kharkiv counteroffensive, one of the most rapid and successful ground operations of the entire war. Russia has been desperately trying to take it back ever since. And in late 2024 and 2025, Putin was trying harder than ever. The slow Russian push toward Kupiansk began in earnest in late 2024. Driven by elements of the First Guards tank army, a formation historically considered one of Russia's most prestigious combined arms armies, based in the Moscow military district, holding elite status comparable to the most decorated formations in the Russian military. The First Guards tank army's continued operational commitment to the Kupiansk axis reflected the absolute strategic priority that Russia placed on recapturing the rail junction and reopening the northern approach toward Kharkiv. This was not a minor operation. This was Putin's most prestigious army committing itself to one of the most important strategic objectives of the entire war. Russia's method was not a traditional frontal assault. It was infiltration. Russian troops seeped into the city through gaps in Ukrainian defensive coverage and stayed hidden for months, establishing positions inside the urban terrain before Ukrainian forces had fully recognized the scale of the penetration. By autumn 2025, Russian units had broken through to Kupiansk from the north, entering the city from that direction and capturing most of the right bank portion. Maps published by Deep State, Ukraine's open-source intelligence tracking project, showed Russian penetration reaching approximately 6 kilometers deep from the Oskil River into the city's urban terrain. This was when the situation became politically uncomfortable for Russian commanders. According to a senior Kartia officer quoted by Ukrainska Pravda, Russian commanders chose to classify the operation internally as a counter-sabotage mission rather than report to Putin that the city had been lost and needed to be retaken in a full military operation. The framing was a bureaucratic fiction designed to manage upward reporting and protect the careers of senior officers from Putin's wrath. But that bureaucratic fiction collided violently with reality when Gerasimov delivered his November 20th liberation report to Putin. The president of Russia was effectively being briefed on a battlefield situation that had been deliberately misrepresented by his own commanders. And Ukraine was about to make sure the entire world saw the truth. Ukraine's response to the Russian infiltration was masterful in its precision and ruthless in its execution. In September 2025, Ukraine's commander-in-chief Oleksandr Syrsky personally created the Kardia Search and Strike Group, a specialized formation assembled specifically to solve the tactical problem that Russian urban infiltration presented. The group brought together some of Ukraine's most capable units under a unified command structure designed for precision urban operations. It included the 13th Kardia Brigade, the 425th Skala Assault Regiment commanded by Oleksandr Flint Nestorenko, the 92nd Assault Brigade, the Foreign Legion of the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine, and the 144th Mechanized Brigade. The first unit deployed into the area north of Kupiansk was Skala, a drone assault regiment whose very name encoded its identity as a drone-first formation. The mission was crystal clear: cut off Russian infiltration routes into the city. A source from the Skala command told Ukrainska Pravda directly, the immediate goal was to cut off the infiltration routes. And over the next 3 months, that is exactly what they accomplished. What followed between October and December 2025 was a systematic destruction of every Russian unit that had established itself inside and around Kupiansk. The Kardia grouping defeated multiple battalions and assault units. It destroyed elements of the 121st and 122nd Motorized Rifle Regiments. It crushed the 30th Engineer Regiment of the 68th Motorized Rifle Division. It dismantled elements of the 27th Motorized Rifle Brigade, all formations supported by the prestigious 1st Guards Tank Army. In some engagements, the situation became so urgent that Ukrainian forces planted explosives in high-rise buildings and collapsed entire structures with Russian forces still trapped inside. Between September 26th and December 12th alone, units of the Kardia grouping killed 1,027 Russian servicemen in and around Kupiansk. But the most shocking statistic of all came from UK Defense Intelligence, which reported through United 24 Media that at one point during the operation, the kill ratio between Russian and Ukrainian losses reached 27-1. That means Ukraine was killing 27 Russian soldiers for every single Ukrainian soldier lost. Let that number sink in. 27-1. This is not a ratio seen anywhere on the front in the early years of the war, when the general exchange rate was approximately 6 or 7-1. The 27-1 kill ratio at Kupiansk represents a fundamental transformation in Ukrainian tactical capability. It reflects everything Ukraine had spent the preceding year developing and refining: FPV drone dominance in urban terrain, real-time precision targeting of individual Russian positions, complete encirclement of Russian units that eliminated reinforcement and resupply, coordinated multi-brigade operations against an enemy that had penetrated without the logistics depth to sustain a prolonged hold. By December 25th, 2025, even Russia's own military bloggers, the pro-Kremlin war correspondents who had spent weeks celebrating the Kupiansk capture, had completely switched their messaging. An entire wave of posts appeared on Russian social media acknowledging that Kupiansk was gone. Viktor Trehubov, head of communications for Ukraine's joint forces, stated the obvious. An entire wave of messages appeared saying that Kupiansk is gone. Even Russian propagandists have switched to a line acknowledging that the city is no longer under their control. This was extraordinary. The Kremlin's official channels never corrected the November 20th liberation announcement. Putin was never publicly told he had been misled. The defense ministry never issued a retraction. But the operational reality on the ground was so undeniable that even the most loyal Russian propagandists could no longer maintain the fiction. It was a crack in the Kremlin's information control that revealed something deeply important about the internal strain of managing a narrative that had diverged completely from reality. The Kupiansk disaster does not exist in isolation. It is part of a much larger pattern of Russian military collapse that has been accelerating throughout 2025 and into 2026. According to NATO intelligence reported by a senior alliance official, Russia lost 400,000 troops killed and wounded in 2025 alone. That made 2025 the single deadliest year for Russian forces in the entire war. Total Russian casualties since February 2022 have now reached 1.3 million, including 350,000 confirmed killed in action. That number exceeds total Soviet losses during the entire 9-year Afghanistan war, compressed into just 4 years of conflict in a neighboring country that Russia had expected to conquer in days. In the first 3 months of 2026 alone, President Zelensky reported that Russia had lost another 89,000 troops killed or seriously wounded. Across November 2025, December 2025, and January 2026 combined, Russian losses totaled nearly 100,000 soldiers in less than 90 days. The recruitment side is even worse for Putin. According to United 24 media analysis citing Bloomberg sources, in January 2026 alone, the Russian army lost 9,000 more troops than it managed to recruit. That is a net monthly deficit of 9,000 soldiers that compounds every single month it is not closed. Russia's 2026 recruitment target was 409,000 troops. By the first quarter, Russia was achieving only 22% of that target. At the current pace, Russia will recruit approximately 90,000 troops against a goal of 409,000, while simultaneously losing soldiers at a rate that far exceeds even that inadequate recruitment pace. Ukraine's stated goal is to eliminate more than 50,000 Russian troops per month. If sustained, that pace makes the gap between Russian losses and replacements progressively and structurally worse. While Kupiansk was being recaptured, Ukraine was simultaneously advancing across multiple fronts in coordinated operations that have left Russian commanders unable to manage resource allocation. According to RBC Ukraine reporting and the Institute for the Study of War, Ukrainian forces regained significant territory near Kupiansk while liberating more than 400 square kilometers in the south of the country during winter and spring 2026. The Institute for the Study of War emphasized that Ukrainian counterattacks in the south created what it described as cascading operational and strategic consequences for Russia's spring-summer offensive. Russian troops were forced to choose between containing the Ukrainian advance and redeploying forces to priority directions. Russia did not have enough soldiers to do both. Commander-in-Chief Syrsky confirmed that Ukrainian forces regained control of 8 settlements in the south since the end of January 2026 and liberated 400 square kilometers of Russian-occupied territory in the Oleksandrivka direction at the intersection of Zaporizhzhia, Donetsk, and Dnipropetrovsk oblasts. United 24 media described it as Ukraine's fastest territorial gain since 2023. The active offensive operations near Kupiansk also eliminated the possibility of a Russian advance on Kharkiv, Ukraine's second-largest city, home to 1.5 million people. Russia had been building toward Kharkiv as a major strategic objective in its northern approach. Ukraine did not just defend a city. Ukraine eliminated the entire Russian threat to a metropolis of 1.5 million people. What Russia's performance at Kupiansk reveals about the First Guards Tank Army is one of the most embarrassing institutional failures in modern Russian military history. The First Guards Tank Army, described by military analysts as one of Russia's most elite formations with paper strength of 35,000 to 50,000 troops and hundreds of armored vehicles, had committed major elements to the Kupiansk axis across months of grinding operations. The units it deployed into the city were cut off, encircled, resupplied only by vulnerable air bridges that Ukrainian drone operators could monitor and interdict, and ultimately reduced to surrender or destruction at a ratio that UK defense intelligence documented as historically extraordinary. According to Oryx's independently verified equipment loss tracking, Russia had lost by January 2026 a staggering 4,438 tanks since the beginning of the invasion, plus 8,735 infantry fighting vehicles, plus over 13,800 armored vehicles in total. Those losses have progressively hollowed out the inventory of precisely the kind of armored combined arms formations that the First Guards Tank Army represents. British Defense Secretary John Healey confirmed publicly that the overall trend showed Russia consistently losing more troops than it could recruit on a sustained monthly basis. Russia is dying faster than Russia can grow. The role of drone warfare in the Kupiansk operation deserves special attention because it illustrates the broader transformation that drone technology has imposed on the entire character of modern war. The Skala Assault Regiment was assigned the most technically demanding mission of the operation, cutting off Russian infiltration routes. In previous eras of warfare, this mission would have required conventional infantry forces to physically occupy terrain and hold blocking positions against enemy approach, accepting massive casualties that exposed positions generate. In Kupiansk, it was accomplished primarily by drone operators establishing persistent aerial coverage over the roads, trails, and river crossings through which Russian forces were moving men and supplies into the city. Ukrainian drone operators watched those routes 24 hours a day, identified Russian logistics vehicles and troop movements, and destroyed them before they could reach the units already inside the urban perimeter. The burned-out vehicles that marked Russian supply routes into the city were not the result of artillery strikes or hidden anti-tank teams. They were the accumulated evidence of drone precision applied systematically and relentlessly over weeks of operation. When the Kardia grouping then moved to encircle the Russian forces inside the city, those forces were already attrited, partially supplied, and operating without the reinforcement capacity needed to break out or receive a relief column. The 27-to-1 kill ratio was not an accident. It was the predictable output of a military system engineered specifically to impose maximum attrition on an adversary that committed to holding urban terrain without the logistics architecture needed to sustain that hold under drone interdiction. In December 2025, President Zelensky visited Kupiansk personally. He stood in front of the city sign. He filmed himself looking directly into a camera. And he delivered a deliberate piece of political communication aimed at the Kremlin, at Ukraine's domestic audience, and at the international community simultaneously. The humiliation that visit represented for Putin was historic. Less than 1 month earlier, Gerasimov had personally briefed the Russian president that Kupiansk had been liberated by Russian forces. State media had broadcast the announcement to all of Russia. And now the Ukrainian president was standing inside the supposedly liberated city, looking directly into a camera and proving every word of the Russian announcement to be a lie. International media described it as precisely what it was. Russia's entire information operation around Kupiansk had collapsed under the combined weight of what Ukraine's Kartia grouping, its Scala drone operators, and an intelligence officer who never abandoned the city had actually accomplished on the ground. The city is Ukrainian. It always was. And the price Russia paid for insisting otherwise in soldiers, in prestige, in credibility, and in the strategic opportunity cost of committing the First Guards tank army to an operation that ended in encirclement is a price that compounds with every subsequent battle in which Ukraine applies the same lessons. The Kupiansk liberation represents the maturation of Ukrainian military capability into something that analysts at the Institute for the Study of War, UK Defense Intelligence, the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, and multiple independent research institutions have all noted as strategically transformative. Ukraine can now design and execute complex offensive operations against prepared Russian positions. Ukraine can achieve kill ratios that impose structurally unsustainable attrition on Russian assault formations. Ukraine can hold liberated terrain against counterattack. And Ukraine can simultaneously project offensive pressure in multiple geographic directions at once. In the south in Zaporizhzhia and Dnipropetrovsk, in the north near Kupiansk and Kharkiv, across the Zaporizhzhia axis toward Melitopol. Each of these simultaneous pressure points forces Russia to make allocation decisions with resources Russia does not have in sufficient quantity to manage every front effectively. And those decisions, made under the compounding pressure of accelerating losses and decelerating recruitment, are generating strategic consequences that extend far beyond any single city or any single battle. Russia is being slowly and methodically dismembered as a fighting force, one Kupiansk-style operation at a time. The bottom line is this: Vladimir Putin's 100,000-man army is collapsing. Russia is losing more soldiers than it can recruit every single month. The prestigious First Guards tank army has been humiliated at Kupiansk. Ukraine has liberated 400 square kilometers of Russian-occupied territory in just months. The kill ratio has reached 27-to-1 in Ukraine's favor. Russian military bloggers are openly contradicting Kremlin propaganda. And Zelensky personally walked into the city that Russian state media insisted had been liberated by Russia just weeks earlier. This is what military catastrophe looks like in slow motion. This is what an empire looks like as it loses its grip. This is what happens when a 27-year-old intelligence officer inside a captured city refuses to give up, when drone operators redefine modern warfare, and when Ukraine refuses to accept defeat. History will remember Kupiansk as the moment the world finally understood that Putin's invincible army is anything but. And the consequences of that realization will reshape the global balance of power for decades to come. For all the latest breaking news on Ukraine, Russia, and the future of European security, like this video, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Stay informed. Stay alert. Slava Ukraini.